Hello, welcome to PTI's first ever webinar. My name is Stephanie Morley, and I'm the Director of Conferences here at PTI. Before we begin this webinar on Debate the Future of Automation, I would like to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar will be available on demand on the PTI website later this week, so feel free to let your colleagues know that if they register now, they can listen to it later. We would like to make this webinar as interactive as possible, so encourage you to pose questions as we go along throughout the attendee chat buttons. Please submit them and we will tackle as many as possible in the allocated time. In this webinar, we will be discussing how organizations are managing problems introduced by automation and the new level of systemic risks that automation introduces and how to address them. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Chuck Schneider, Chief Customer Officer at Navis, who will introduce each of the panelists and share some opening remarks. Thanks for joining us today, Chuck, and panelists. Over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I want to start off by thanking you and everyone at PTI for the opportunity to moderate this panel. I've been involved in automation now for probably 16 years, and every time we have a discussion like this, I learn something from the panelists. I think this topic is quite timely considering everything going on in the world, and I'm guessing many of you, like me, are working from home today. It's quite interesting. Everyone at Navis is actually working remotely, and I talk to many customers and other companies we work with that are in the same situation. And so one of the questions is automation the solution for some of this? I was very encouraged today. I got up early, and I braved going outside and went to the local grocery store because I had to get a few things. And as I expected, there was a line. But once I got into the store, the shelves were stocked. There was fresh vegetables and fruit. There was canned goods. There was toilet paper, everything I might need. And I thought about that and thought, is that a testament to how full the warehouses were before we got into this pandemic, or the resilience of the supply chain? And I hope we can touch a little bit on that today in this debate. As I think about the resilience of the supply chain, though, I do see a few things that are concerning. Many of you probably saw in the news this past week that the Port of Houston had to shut down terminals for a day because one of their employees tested positive for COVID-19. And it's quite a scary thought to think that such a key node in the supply chain can be shut down potentially for an indefinite amount of time. And so, at Navis and our customers, we're engaging to figure out what can we do to help our customers do, I'll say maybe not more, but do the same with less people as they send people to work from home or they work with skeleton crews at their terminals. And so is automation the answer? And I hope the panelists today are going to give all of you some insights into that. At Navis, we've seen a little bit of a decrease in the interest in greenfield terminals, but there's quite a big interest right now in brownfield automation and a lot of interest actually in straddle carry automation. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about that today, and hopefully the audience will engage in some questions in those areas. So I'm really excited about the panel we have today. We've got veterans from both the supply chain, container terminal industry, automation technology. And what I'm going to do is I'll introduce each presenter. The presenter will spend a few minutes going over some prepared content. And then at the end, when the last presenter is done, I'll ask questions, some I've prepared in advance, and hopefully all of you will use the chat capability and ask questions as well. So without any further ado, let me introduce Lars Jensen, the CEO of SeaIntelligence Consulting. Lars has 16 years of experience from inside the container shipping industry, including 8 years as director, driving development and market intelligence for Maersk Line, Maersk Logistics, and the Container Ship Company. Additionally, Lars has spent 2 years as CEO of the purely online container carrier UShip, and he's the author of books Liner Shipping for 2025 and Culture Shock in the Maersk Line. So I know he's not going to be able to hear you, but please join me in welcoming Lars Jensen. Lars, take it away.
Thank you very much. If you can just pull up the single slide I have. Basically, I think this is a very opportune time to talk about automation, and I'm going to keep this brief as we definitely want to hear from the other speakers as well. But just to set the stage, I mean, what we are looking into right now is, from my perspective, we are seeing a development in 2020 that will lead to a downturn that's of the same magnitude as we saw in the financial crisis. Just putting two numbers on that, that means for the container lines, we will see the world move 17 million containers less in 2020 than in 2019. If you are in the terminal and port part of the business, you will see the number of port handlings be reduced potentially by 80 million TEU. That is the level of impact we are looking at. But I would like to see this in a slightly larger picture, because clearly we are faced with a pandemic. But the pandemic is not the only systemic risk that we are seeing in this industry. It is not the first time that we're seeing major blows when we stop to think about it. It is not uncommon. We have seen, for example, temporary shutdowns either on the U.S. East Coast or U.S. West Coast that leaves with phenomenal ripple effects. We had Maersk Line, the world's largest carrier, coming completely offline for a few days back in 2017 due to a cyber attack, for example. So there are plenty of examples we can find that we do have systemic risks in this industry, and we can easily find more. But when we then start to look at how does this impact us as an industry, how could we potentially make the industry more resilient? There's a natural tendency to see automation as one of the solutions. To some degree it is, but we need to stop and think, because it's a dual-edged sword. Let's look at where we could alleviate some of the systemic risks we have now. You mentioned very kindly the example from Port of Houston. We also have examples from the Middle East and Europe in recent days where ships, in theory, were allowed to come in and dock, but pilots were refusing to go on board the ships out of fear of getting infected with the virus. Again, something that could be alleviated with technology. If you look at the case of the ports, you can argue the more automated you make the port, the fewer people you need out there. That will also mean an impact like a pandemic will reduce the risk of the port shutting down. If we allow the pilots to remote log in using VR and AR tools to remotely be on board a vessel, we can alleviate the problem of people actually going on board vessels. We have congestion issues arising in India where a lack of physical documentation means the cargo couldn't clear customs. Automate and digitize all of that and we eliminate the problem. So on one hand, yes, there is definitely a case that automation also at the terminal and port level can reduce the impact we see from some of these larger risks, especially when they're people related. But we also need to consider that if we proceed down this path, or maybe that's wrongly phrased, because in my view we will proceed down this path, we also need to realize we are then introducing other risks we also need to take care of. We should not ignore them. The obvious risk, of course, is the cyber risk. And I think we could spend the entire day just talking about that, so I won't. But we also need to keep in mind, the more we automate, the more we become dependent on a very, very limited number of, yes, people. Because we might have, in theory, a port with 0 people running around outside. But who is it we need to step in when some of this equipment fails? Who is it we need to step in when the operating system that runs the entire terminal for whatever reason crashes? And I don't think anybody here is naive enough to believe that we can build an automated system with all the software that goes along with it and have an uptime which is 100.0%. That, of course, is not going to happen. So as we proceed down the path of automation, we gain a lot of benefits, but we also have to face head on the very large and increased risk we have on the people side, because we do become dependent on a lot fewer people. And if those people are not there, if we can't attract them, if they disappear, or if they, in the case of a pandemic, is suddenly not available, what is our backup plan? What is our safeguard to make sure we actually do have these right people? So with this very, very brief introduction, what I'm basically trying to paint here is a picture that automation is good. We have a lot of wheels in motion already. The pandemic we are seeing now, from my perspective, is not fundamentally going to change anything. That might sound a bit harsh, but I really don't think so. What it will do, like any other crisis we've been facing in the past, is it will help us to focus and accelerate a development that was already underway. We are already underway with a digital and automation transformation of the industry. The pandemic will serve to speed this process up, especially when it comes to removing some of the process steps that are dependent on physical labor. That can be moving paper, that can be driving trucks around, it can be anything involving people. That will happen, it will accelerate. But we need to take very serious the introduced risk we are then having, that we do become dependent on a lot fewer people. Let me finish by using the Port of Houston as an example. I mean, I honestly don't know exactly how many people run around on the Port of Houston quayside, but that's not going to be a limited number. Yet only one guy falling ill was enough to shut down the entire terminal. In a future automated terminal, that one guy might be your admin guy, who is the only guy, if you haven't done your contingency planning right, that is able to restart your systems because it just crashed. So we need to take the people angle serious in the automation that goes ahead. So with that, let me relinquish my time and hand it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Lars. That was quite insightful. One little follow-up I have is you talked about the issue of people. What about the physical location of people? Because part of the problem with Houston, right, was the one guy came into the operations center and then everybody feared. What about moving people to different locations? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but the physical location, again, here's the issue. You can then say, fine, you can log in and do it from home, then we are reducing that risk. But the moment you start having people logging in from home or from other locations, you're then increasing the risk. What if that connection doesn't work? And again, that we shouldn't take this lightly. Let me give one very, very up-to-date example. This morning, literally, well, actually, it was probably just before midnight Central Europe time. I hope all of them that are available on this call are already aware of it. There is a warning coming out from Microsoft. If you use Windows, any kind of Windows, there is right now a piece of malware floating around that quite literally can take remote control of your computer unless you install, or rather not install, that you perform a small fix, because for right now, there is no patch available. That is just one very simple example that we are now in a world where, from a resilience perspective, that's great. We have a lot of people working from home. A lot of the supply chains are working because of this. But at the same time, we are introducing a new level of risk because these links can very easily be removed again.
Very good point. Thank you, Lars. Let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Oscar Pernia, and I'm really happy to have Oscar here. Not only is he quite an amazing individual, he's also my friend. We work together at Navis. He's the Director of Automation and Process Engineering for Terminal Investment Limited. And I can tell you, Oscar is a very mindful leader. He's very qualified in IT and OT. He has extensive experience in automation technologies. A lot smarter than me, too. He's got a doctorate in industrial engineering with 18 years experience in system integration and operational processes, design, and optimization at ports and container terminals. So please join me in welcoming my friend Oscar Pernia.
Thank you, Chuck. This word coming from you means a lot. Good day, everybody. Thank you, PTI and Navis, for the opportunity of being with these fantastic panelists. My presentation is going to be about the current challenges for automation to enable that future. Indeed, some of the messages will be strongly connected to what Lars Jensen already mentioned. My points are more coming from the design and execution of terminal automation projects I am part of, my previous experience. Three specific areas I will focus on: the solution framework, meaning how we terminal operators work with suppliers. The second one, related to that, the integration risk that the terminal operator are in when implementing and designing automation, and the last one, very important, with people, the workforce boundaries that we have today. And next slide, please. So on the solution framework, the challenges are related to the connection between the terminal design process to terminal development to terminal deployment, but also the feedback loops to address agility in the process. There is not a perfect solution at the engineering phase, right? So we all need to be agile on addressing the issues and the refinement as they come. The second is on how we engage with suppliers, in particular the ones related to equipment and software, and those suppliers understanding about operational and organizational aspects. That understanding needs to improve, and is our responsibility, of course, to better explain and to better describe how those are going to be implemented. Then the solution completeness and also the flexibility. There is no perfect solution, that's clear, and there is not a key-to-gate solution available in the market from one single provider. So we all need to combine different pieces and make it then working together, which is normally the big challenge on integrating those. And last but not least is the lack of effective industry standards to leverage at design phase, but also later at implementation. This is being a big issue, and every single automated project basically is reinventing the wheel. Then on the, sorry, I jumped too fast. On the integration risk, the challenges, you can see in my diagram, the number of systems are increasing. It's not anymore only about the TOS. The TOS continue being a fundamental piece, but now we have equipment control system, which is as sophisticated and as expensive, as risky as the TOS. And then we have not turnkey solutions. There is the willingness in the market, yes, and the suppliers are really pushing the boundaries out to offer more and to offer better, but still the customer is lifting most of the weight to make it happen, and the system integrator role is really missing. Then, as we get into the deployment and the project planning phase, there are scope requirement discoveries and also integration requirement discoveries. Too many and too late, impacting the overall risk that the terminal operator is taking, but also the quality of the solution and the delivery on time. And then on testing, I have the impression that suppliers and customers, when talking about software, we have different QA, quality assurance processes. So we need to align those, otherwise we are validating the solution from a very different angle. And the final one is something that is happening, is not mature yet, but how to partner on performance, how to add more skin in the game to suppliers and do it effectively. Again, the willingness is in place, but how to make it tangible is the challenge. And the last one is on people. I think Lars mentioned as well. So far we have really the backbone of the terminal with automation is becoming the triangle between operations, but really depending on maintenance and IT, and more on OT. All those aspects need to be managed. Then when talking about the outsourcing, and especially the stevedore in Docker side, we have really flexible workforce environments. We don't have a joint forward thinking to create a future together with functions instead of discussing different classes and different work groups and roles. That is not being effective so far. Then digitalization is a reality in other industries. But in our case, we have many barriers for doing simple things. For automation, again, this triangle between operation, IT, and equipment is a fundamental backbone that has to work seamlessly. And digitalization is playing a big role on that. One important constraint for people working better together is the data. The data is still in silos. The data is not usable, not the structure. So when thinking about big data or robotic process automation, AI, machine learning, etc., it's very difficult because the data is not there, the system cannot learn. But to stay positive, the future will come for sure. The system will drive, the workforce will assist. Today is in the other way around. But the human brain will steer and will be even more necessary. So that's something that we really need to focus on creating the new qualification and making the people believe on that. And then the last slide is really on the conclusion part. So the benefits for automation are clear: efficiency, safety, environment, security, but also how the terminals are serving the supply chain in terms of transparency, predictability, repeatability, etc. So the future is automated and then digital. To be honest, there is an inflection point where I see in the other way around, because we need a digital core foundation to make data the oil for automation to work properly, and is not in place today. But certainly our industry needs to resolve the current basic challenges to make solutions easier, make integration more predictable, and be more inclusive with the workforce, as benefits should be for all the parties involved. Only on that way we will succeed on making automation the norm for container terminals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. I've got a little follow-up for you, because you mentioned that standards are very important, but you also mentioned that there's been so many different approaches taking to automation, and I'm sure you can appreciate that makes it hard for vendors. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe looking to design a new automated terminal and wants to take advantage of standards, or wants to do, take a low-cost risk to designing an automated terminal?
So the standards are not in place, not in our industry. Okay, we have IS 95, for example, is the automation system international standard that many airports and factories and warehouses are using. We don't have that in our industry. Also, there are very good initiatives like TIC 4.0 that is taking a very good and very good approach and having all the willingness, but the scope is very narrow already. So they are not tackling the fundamental problems. But my recommendation to a terminal operator would be to focus first on the processes and the digitalization of those, and then the type of automation that you introduce in terms of equipment automation, process automation, or automated decision making will be easier, because you will have the processes clear, but also the data that will support those processes. Another aspect is the organization. How you design that organization. In the project that I was part of, in most of the cases, the organization is designed very, very late, including the part that is connecting the dockers. That has to be an integrated part of that. So focus on processes is a fundamental area. I think that the technology is in place. The suppliers are evolving, supporting us in many different ways, but we need to really help the suppliers to follow standards and to have as early definition as possible on what not only the terminal is going to look like, but also the processes and organization part.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Well, let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Rafiq Swash. So you just heard from Oscar, who's talking about the integration challenges and putting all the technologies together. Dr. Swash is going to talk to you a little bit about the technologies. I hope he's the founder of Aidrivers. And Dr. Swash brings extensive experience in technology-driven industries, academia, and research centers globally. He's contributed to research in artificial intelligence, visual information search, financial computing, computer vision, 3D sensors, data analytics, and automation on an international level. Dr. Swash's professional experience spans expert systems, autonomous vehicles, advanced connected robotics, IoT, advanced imaging and visualization, information search and retrieval, as well as knowledge representations with behavioral and pattern modeling. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Swash.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it has been quite a good start by hearing Lars and talking about the automation going through to the phase of requires of high-skill people. And if we go to the next slide, please, Chuck. Basically, from my view is that I like to share from more of academic perspectives into this industrial automation that currently, or I would say so far, automation has been all about the physical, just making sure that systems are operating. That was the ultimate goal of every single industrial operator, that making sure the system is up and running. I think that has been taken away. Some of current automated systems to lead in the area of, as Dr. Oscar said, that data is being limited or without having such a standard. I think if we go to the next slide, this automation expectation is changing now. That initially that early stages that I think you have gone little past, yes. Early stages that it was very difficult to keep this automated system up and running, and it wasn't good at the time. And then we worked so hard to make sure that system is up and running, and it become a good, right? And so far all these systems are up and running and in a very good status. But now, as we are leading to a future, now we are understanding that they are not good enough in order for us to meet the future requirements. That means in terms of the sustainability, in terms of the productivity, in terms of scalability, where we are not able to optimize them, because these things are generated for a number of different challenges. So, Chuck, if we can go to the next slide. So, if we look at the current systems, for example, we have been automating cranes that has the sensor dependency. It uses a specific laser sensors, or that uses specific PLCs, and that doesn't have, they never been thought about the scalability in terms of the infrastructure connectivity, the lack of APIs. And if you look at the database, data levels, that yes, there are some data available, which means that status data is certain things running or not running. However, that we are still lacking huge amount of data that's required for machine learning in this case, that requires for optimization, or that requires for a better operation emotions. I think the next step is that to understand of the needs for us, that how automation expectation has changed from being able to running into being able to optimize as time goes along, and also having some level of independency from the technology that we are using or the technology being used. These things are very, very important if we like to make sure that the systems are sustainable, or we like to make sure that we can achieve the uptime. I think the initial concern was shared, which I agree with Lars, that we are moving to the stage of high-skill people, and their presence will be matters, and their knowledge will matters, that those people will not be easily replaceable. And how are we going to have safeguard the system in terms of the knowledge sustainability? I think today every single port operator is going away, being from the terminal operators into being some level of a technical. The companies they become more of a technological company, because they use more complex systems, they use more complex integrated solutions, as Oscar said, and they need to have level of knowledge themselves in order to make the system sustainable for the future. And that could be as simple as what level of data that we need to create, or what level of data that's needed in order for us to be able to achieve scalability for the future, or in order for us to achieve the optimizations. I think these things are now open for us to start thinking from now, making sure that our systems are not depending on certain sensors, or our software solutions are open for integrations, or the system that the integrated solutions generating enough data that can be utilized by machine learning in order to further identify the area of optimization. Well, I can continue talking about this area, but I would say is that these are the areas that I would think that the future automation is important in order to give us the level of the control over the growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Swash. You know, you talk about sensors. Have you seen anything new that really is a game changer in terms of how these systems are being put together?
I mean, I can pick that typical the use of sensors currently that's been used in the cranes that use a simple laser sensors, and these cranes are dependent on a certain type of sensors in order to be able to continue operating. I think, of course, that sensor has a good lifetime of 5 years or 6 years or 4 years, and these sensors are expensive, and these can be easily replaced by cameras, which is a lot cheaper, and with the use of AI or computer vision or some level of algorithms that can generate a data that's required for the optimizing or delivering the operation requirements for the cranes. I mean, currently the sensors are just used for a dummy depth sensing in order to avoid detect the actual obstacles or stop. But then we can use cameras, and that will give beyond such intelligence. It can give you the depth sensing, but also other visual elements that could be used for other purposes in terms of the business requirements. I mean, having said that, and also going for the automated vehicles that uses the transponders, and now the growth of technology, now we have a better sensors that can give us the natural navigations. I mean, all these things are coming in, but the question is that how these can be deployed intelligently, then the operators remain to be sustainable.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, our final speaker probably needs no introduction. Wolfgang Lehmacher is an expert for the World Economic Forum Network, and he's a global thought leader and practitioner in supply chain and logistics. Wolfgang was the director and head of supply chain and transport industries at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, New York, a partner and managing director at the global strategy firm CVA in Hong Kong, and president and CEO of Geopost Intercontinental, the global expansion vehicle of French La Poste in Paris. Please join me in welcoming Wolfgang Lehmacher.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me in this discussion. I'd like to share 3 messages and on them. The first is global trade is evolving. The second, green is the new way of shipping. And digitization is a multifaceted opportunity, in particularly now. And digitization for me includes automation. So I take digitization at large. Now I would like to elaborate on the first message. The discussion is very much now on, can I have the next slide? On COVID-19. And I would like to contextualize COVID-19 because what we see happening is not only the result of the outbreak, but it's just one situation and one symptom in the evolution of global trade. And it will accelerate certain elements which we have heard before. Trade is shifting and going digital. And I'm not sure whether everybody is aware of this. We hear very often that global trade, globalization is going backwards. I see it the opposite. I see that globalization is changing gears. First, goods producing value chains have become less trade intensive. So that means although manufacturing output is growing, less goes over the border. So this is not driven by trade tariffs. This is not driven by other phenomena. This is just a trend in globalization. Coming to digitization, I would like to draw your attention to another trend. Cross-border services are growing more than 60% faster than trade in goods. Fine, you might say. But national statistics already attribute 23% of all trade to services. And some experts think if you add intercompany exchanges and made available for free, and for example, what is added as services to physical goods, the number could be as high as 50%, which underlines my statement that trade is going digital. And the third point I would like to mention is that 20% of goods trade is based on labor cost arbitrage. That means this is the old thinking of lower labor cost. But this also means that there is a significant share, the lion's share, is in fact in intangible assets. And that means higher skilled labor, and that means higher value of goods. And the fourth trend I would like to mention is that thanks to advanced technologies like robotics, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, goods producing value chains are becoming more regionally concentrated, especially within Asia and Europe. I also would like to mention the trade wars. The trade wars have weakened the economy, and now with COVID-19, we need to see how this sequence of events plays out. But what matters in the context of digitization and automation is that the tensions have accelerated China's transformation towards a technology and digital economy. China will advance its high value added products, innovation and production. So we will see China driving much more the digitization and automation as before. And China also comes out first out of the new coronavirus crisis. So we have to see how China takes advantage out of this time advantage. So the coronavirus is bettering the global economy. And the estimate is that we will have a significant hit on the global economy, on the global economic growth. And I believe that the impact on digitization and the process and advancement of digitization will be significant. So what are we facing in terms of impact of the coronavirus? In a recent ISM survey, 62% of respondents reported shipment delays for China-sourced goods. 57% reported longer lead times for Chinese goods from Tier 1 suppliers, with an average lead time doubling compared to the end of 2019. 46% reported delays in loading goods at Chinese ports, etc., etc. And companies have to make sense out of the data and trends and fill the gaps. And this is another area where digitization will play an important role. So what will be the consequences of all this? Companies don't need only to focus on the short term, but also think about the long term and what does it all mean. Large companies will benefit, small and mid-sized enterprises will struggle, with some going out of business. The regionalization will accelerate, and that doesn't mean, as I have explained, the end of globalization, but a new area of globalization, which is the digital area. And of course, digitization and automation will accelerate. Virtual workforces become the norm across all stakeholder groups, from governments to businesses to international organizations. But with all the coronavirus, we should not forget about other challenges we have. And now I'm coming to the next message. There is no doubt that the world is on fire. International shipping carries 80% of global trade and accounts for 2 to 3% of greenhouse gas emissions annually. We know all that the IMO has agreed to set a strategy and vision and reduce emissions as much as possible in this century. Companies like Maersk have announced net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and put significant funds behind that. On 1st of January 2020, we have in addition the getting into force of the IMO 2020, the 0.5% global cap on sulfur. And with the 1st of March 2020, the carrier ban came into force. And we see with the MSC Johanna that the world is committed to put this all in place because that was the first casualty. Without technology, all these targets, all this what we wish to implement in terms of climate action will not. Digitization is a multifaceted opportunity. This is my last message. We see digitization now unfolding in a large way. There has never been that much activity. The current value of the global ship tech market is estimated at over $100 billion today and is set to grow to be worth $278 billion by 2030. Gains traction. With the Digital Container Shipping Association, the industry has now got a body that can deal with industry-wide standardization. Data sharing and collaboration models like the port collaboration decision-making concept gain in popularity. What is the role of digitization in green shipping? I have already said, without digitization and automation, without technology, we will not achieve our goals. The biggest levers are alternative fuels and the improved flow of goods through digitization and automation. I would like to finish with what comes out of the new coronavirus pandemic for the digitization of the industry. We have to ensure highest visibility across the supply chain and the demand networks, because what we have seen now, and Chuck has mentioned that at the beginning, is that we are carrying tremendous inventory in the supply chain, which was good now, but I wonder what is still left and what is the cost behind all that inventory. And that means that companies have to digitize their supply chain as fast as possible, rethink the customer journey more digitally, upgrade risk management tools, and to work on systems and implement systems which allow the workers to work from home, because this is not a given. Some systems can only be assessed on site. And some tailwind we will see. COVID-19 will break the regulatory barrier to online tools and interactions. So at the end, I think we have a chance here that the world will move towards a much more digital and possibly healthier lifestyle and way of working and operating. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang, and I'm all for a healthier lifestyle and way of working. One question I'll ask you, if you look at the recovery there's a lot of talk about, is this going to be a V-shaped recovery, a U or an L-shaped recovery? You're going to have to pull out your crystal ball maybe. Where do you think we're going to end up with this?
Yeah, I think in two scenarios here. The one scenario is that hopefully COVID-19 is seasonal. That would support the recovery we are now seeing in China, and we will soon see in other parts of Asia. And it will help then later the European and the US economy. The second scenario is that there will be continuous cases, and we will see the economy, unfortunately, fall into a recession. Some think the recession will happen anyway, but for me, that's not a given. So I see these two scenarios.
All right, thank you. Well, we've finished up the presentations now. Let me start off with some of the questions that have come in. And the first one, I think, Wolfgang, you just touched on a little bit. But for all the panelists, if you look at the changes in automation that may be a result of this crisis, what do you see happening, if anything, in the next 12 to 18 months that is different than what you would have thought 3 months ago? All right, if nobody's going to pick it up, I'll ask Oscar, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me, Chuck?
Yeah, yes.
So, well, as you know me, I'm a technical expert, right? So, but I'm Spanish, and what is happening in my home country is really horrible. I would say the consequences of the pandemic in the way we live are still unknown, right? We have different scenarios, as Wolfgang mentioned. We can see that countries' basic supply is really depending on workers that are fully exposed to potential infection, right? Because they have to work outside. So I think that will be a big part of the focus. But from an overall point of view, we need to rethink on how we do things in ports. But overall areas like health, transportation, logistics, as also all the panelists explained, everything is connected. So it will need a holistic rethinking on how we do things in ports. On the terminals, I see more and more focus on business continuity, remote control, remote working, but also the overall sustainability. Maybe this is happening because the way the planet is changing, right? And today, I understand we all forget about the climate change discussion that was very active some months ago, but all these things are connected, right? So I think that we will see more focus on business continuity, autonomous systems, remote work, and so on, but still we will need to assess what this pandemic is going to mean for the planet and then for the ports and the terminals in particular.
Great,
Lars,
thanks.
can I add a comment as well?
Absolutely, Lars.
I mean, what's going to be different is, I see this as a phenomenal roller coaster ride that's going to unfold. And as you could hear from the beginning, I'm not quite sharing Wolfgang's optimism in where this is going, at least in the short to medium term. In the very short term, I see both the environmental agenda, actually also the automation agenda, come to a grinding halt. The reason I see that is I believe demand is going to drop off a cliff. We're already seeing that with purchase orders going to factories, which means, again, all the shipping lines are going to be purely in cash preservation mode for the time ahead. This is a survival event for many of them. Most of them will also survive, but they will focus purely on cash flow, no new investments, no new projects. Once we get out from under this, and we will eventually, and the rebound will come, I think that's going to come not until start 2021, but when it does, then all of these agendas will come back with a vengeance, because suddenly everybody will be very focused on ramping up on the digital and automation agenda, and that will shortly then be followed by the environmental agenda again. But we need to come out of the economic hole before we see that acceleration.
Excellent.
Can I add a comment as well?
Yes.
I think this coronavirus or this COVID-19 has shaped the whole operators or service providers to understand the area of vulnerability and the area of that the intelligence and dependency. I think there has been a great technology has been adopted in the port terminals in terms of the software processing or the crane automations. That the next stage is that as soon as they recover from the cash flow challenges, they will start thinking about prioritization of what are the key projects that they will prioritize. I think the first area that they will try to aim is that the mobility. The port terminal operators already facing huge challenge in recruiting new drivers, sustaining the drivers, delivering the productive or consistent services. That's all caused from the horizontal transportations. The big area of automation will come into a phase in the next coming year will be the autonomous mobility side.
Great, thank you. So let me take a question from the audience. And Lars, this was targeted towards you. You made some comments about the anticipated downturn being similar to what we experienced back in 2007, 2008. In your view, how much better prepared are we this time?
That depends a bit on the perspective you put. From a demand side, we are probably worse off. And here I'm thinking demand for container transportation. The reason I think we're worse off is that consumer demand is going to drop like we saw back then. However, if I look at the scale of inventories, they are now larger than what they were back then. If you look at inventory to sales ratios, we are 10% higher than what we were coming into the financial crisis. And keep in mind, back then, inventories dropped by 18%. So from a demand side, we are potentially worse off. On the supply side and freight rate side, we are to some degree better off, depending on how you define better. Because when you saw the shipping lines' reaction to the virus when it was only in China, they reacted very, very quickly and reduced capacity. They prevented a catastrophic drop in freight rates. Secondly, if you then look at how do you manage the rest of the supply chain, we have seen a tremendous amount of resilience in terms of how can people work from home over the last few weeks. So from the perspective of managing capacity and adjusting to the circumstances, we clearly seem to be better off. From the perspective of having people work from home and keep everything operating, I also think we're better off.
Thanks. Would anybody else like to weigh in on that? Otherwise, I'll move to the next question. This is a combined question. So how supportive are governments around the world to automation and digitization approaches today? And a similar question that came in that said, how should the industry navigate labor environments, especially with their strict union requirements, and are governments going to help there?
So, yeah, if I can take that, Chuck. I touched already on this when I said that the regulatory barriers will be cracked, which means I believe that governments will be more open to digitization and digital services. With the whole development, with the whole situation, they also learn how this works, so they get educated. That helps, because if they don't know, they cannot regulate. So I see this also positive and as an accelerator in terms of governmental acceptance and support.
Jack, do you want me to wait on that?
Absolutely, Oscar.
So I agree with Wolfgang. The digital agenda is very high in all the governments, but I disagree on their not willingness, because they have the willingness, but their understanding on how to resolve the barriers. As you know, I am talking about concrete projects, and we don't see the role of the governments and even port authorities to play an effective role on getting an alignment for not for digital, but more for automation. As I mentioned before, we really focus on roles and salaries instead of talking about functions and how those functions are going to be transformed. Not with equipment automation, because this is part of the past and it was done 30 years ago in Rotterdam and Hamburg, right? But more on when we get mature the terminal that is digitized and automated, how AI and machine learning and all that will transform completely the way we work between the different departments, but also the relationship and the interface with the dockers. So I am really lacking, at least on the 3-4 projects I am working on, a different role, more participation, active participation from the government and the port authorities.
Thanks, Oscar.
Yeah, you mentioned, Chuck, you mentioned also the labor representatives. And I hope, seeing all the requests for protection of labor and the workers, that there will be a shift in the debate there as well.
We can only hope. Well, we're almost out of time. Go ahead.
I was going to just add a comment on there. I think automation is still the new area for the government perspectives. Still that there's a huge amount of policies needs to be developed in terms of taxation perspectives, in terms of the licensing and data ownerships. These area will get good attention and next phase from a government perspective. Of course, there are from country to country different. There are certain countries are encouraging the actual operators to go automation to reduce outside acquisition of human resources or being independent. And from my view is that the government still needs to further develop their existing policies and licensing, especially that when it comes to in terms of the data ownerships, and then where data will sit and how data will be utilized, how data will be gathered, and also that how these automated systems will be applied in terms of the taxation perspectives. So these things areas are still due to grow, and the next 5-10 years time, there will be a lot of new regulations and policies will come into place.
Excellent, thank
where
you.
That government will be able to put new initiatives to support companies to move on that area.
All right, well, I think we have time for one last question, if everybody can be concise. The last question I wanted to pose to everybody, and everybody can take 15, 20 seconds to answer. Are automated terminals getting the ROI out of their investments? And if not, what do they need to do to achieve their goals? And Lars, maybe we can start with you.
The 15-second version is, I don't know, because what would a good ROI be? I am not convinced full automation is the thing to look at. What I'm convinced about is partial automation. It is not full automation for everybody everywhere.
Okay. Oscar?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do agree with Lars. So I think we have to go case by case. In terms of the numbers of the business plan, yes, automation is providing better numbers for ROI, but we need to meet the expectation, which is very optimistic when you look at current results in automated terminal. So the evolution on what I mentioned as workforce, so the labor discussion, but also productivity, maintainability, electrification, and the impact of those in ROI is really necessary.
All right. Thank you, Oscar. Dr. Swash?
I agree. I think it's a very the case-by-case situation that I don't believe that we will have anytime soon a fully automated terminal. We will still have human in between these automated systems to complement the productivity and also to reduce the 100% downtime. A technology definition is something that doesn't always work, right? So we need to have the safeguard how we decouple these automated systems in order to achieve that the sustainability that we don't have at single point failures.
Thank you. And Wolfgang?
I believe that automation is a supplement to, and in whatever form that comes out, dependent on the situation. And to get the ROI out, a good ROI out, is through integration of automation, of terminal automation into the entire maritime value chain. That's my belief.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely.
Go to the last slide. And I think I'm 1 minute over, so I think PTI will probably fire me as moderator to keep everybody on track. But I wanted to thank everyone for attending the webinar. PTI is planning a series of webinars, so please follow Port Technology. And if you have any questions, please contact Stephanie at smorley@porttechnology.org to provide any input you have on the next webinar we might want to do. Thank you all very, very much.